This recent stretch of recruiting has not been good for Penn State.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to some Penn State football recruiting. Thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. The number one daily Penn State sports podcast out there. My name is Zach Seyko, and I am your host of the show. Now, I'm actually going to be a special guest on the Portal, Locked On's recruiting show devoted entirely to recruiting and the transfer portal. Brian Smith is the host. I'm going to chat with him about where Penn State football stands after losing a commit and losing out on some other key recruiting targets. Enjoy.
Penn State, they lost a couple of key recruiting targets to the Clemson Tigers. They've got some other players that are really good in their class, and they got some big visits coming up. To discuss everything Nittany Lions, my guy Zach Seyko from Locked On Penn State. Look, man, Penn State, they went through a rough patch, and a lot of people do, and I know Penn State fans are quick to jump on the negative. I don't have to go to the message board to know what that looks like. What is it that you expect Penn State to do, especially at receiver? That's always something that comes up when you and I talk Penn State recruiting. What's next for them, and what do they already have locked up for this class?
Yeah, this wasn't an ideal sequence. They lost. I'm trying to weigh which one has the bigger impact, the bigger negative impact between losing the likes of Connor Salmin to the Clemson Tigers. That was someone from Maryland. Should have wound up at Penn State. It seemed like all the indicators were pointing there. I'm not saying that it was a slam dunk and that it was a guarantee, is that Penn State was in a good spot, though. They were in a really good spot. And then Clemson wins that one. And it's like, okay, fine. You and I have expressed the concerns about wide receivers, so it's kind of understandable that it's not going to happen every single time. They really have to work all the way back up here. But then this is the one that does sting a little bit is Caden Gebhard. The safety went to the same high school as Ethan Grunkemeyer, so there was that connection there. Penn State's recruited the state of Ohio very well. They've developed safety. If we want to talk about, they're not very good with wide receivers right now, but safeties at defensive backs and cornerbacks, you could argue that's Penn State's bread and butter over the past 5 years. So with the Jair Brown, Jaquan Brisker, Joey Porter Jr., KJ Winston, Jalen Reed, very recently with this draft, and they lose Gebhard. Most people are going to say, well, he's only a 3-star. That's his consensus, right? Look, if Clemson and Penn State want him, he is a phenomenal prospect. So it seemed like this was going to be one that Penn State was going to win, but there's the Tom Allen factor. Tom Allen was a huge part of his recruitment at Penn State. Obviously, he's not going to go to Clemson and say, well, I'll just stop recruiting the high school prospects that I was talking to at Penn State, right? No, that doesn't happen. It's the same concern with J1 Sider. So Tom Allen was the reason that Gebhard ultimately goes to Clemson over Penn State. They also lost Jerquaden Guilford, a wide receiver that was committed and arguably would have been the best wide receiver and honestly one of the best overall prospects when all said and done for this class of 2026. So the pendulum swung back in the wrong direction with the way that things were going in 2026. Penn State was hitting it out of the park left and right. Now they got a little bit of a reality check. So they definitely have to get things in order, because this past stretch with the way things went with these three prospects is not ideal whatsoever.
Yeah, they struck out on the Salmon situation. Is interesting. He's from the Boa School in Maryland. It's a really good academic school, and he's got 10.4 speed.
Oh, he's fast. I know.
Yeah, I mean, he's really fast. Now, the guys that they have already pledged are also very good football players, and I don't want to take anything away from them. And I'll talk about the guys they have committed here at wide receiver just to give a part of it. I'm not as worried about Penn State when we talk about their ability to get DBs, and I don't think you're too worried about it either.
No.
But first off, they've got Rogers. He's a kid that nobody knows that much about because he plays in Delaware. Jasir Rogers is really twitchy. He's a guy that probably is the best player in Delaware, but I would guess by a large margin. And he's a guy that I'm sure once more film gets out, he'll get more offers. But he's a kid that can play slot. Maybe he can even move outside. We'll see. LeVar Keys is similar. He's from DeMatha Catholic. You'll certainly have a lot of eyeballs on him this spring because DeMatha is one of the most famous high school programs in the country. He's another kid. It's really shifty, has athleticism, and can be a deep threat. So Penn State still has 2 guys committed, but they don't have that big body guy. It doesn't have to be Jeremiah Smith, mind you, but they need a bigger guy in this class. If they could have got Salmin, that would have been somebody over 6 foot with sub 10.5 speed. Those things never, in my estimate, go out of style. So hats off to Clemson. And they also got Naeem Burrows too, by the way, who's an excellent player. But if you think about Penn State, they've got the spring coming up. And that's something we're going to talk about here in just a moment. But before we do you feel good overall with where the staff's at? I mean, you brought him up. They lost Jawan Sider to Notre Dame. That's an elite recruiter. I told you for about a year, I thought he was the best individual recruiter in the country. And I was surprised that he left, but it is what it is. James Franklin's a great recruiter. Where do you think, just generically, forget positions, Penn State is overall with the class of 26?
A class of 2026, I still think has top 10 potential. And at this point in time, as we sit here in the middle of March of 2025, it would surprise me if they don't finish in the top 10. So that's where my expectations lie, because Kevin Brown is the anchor of this. They got their quarterback in Troy Huhn. I know that they're still scouting Peyton Falzone, but do they want him as a quarterback? Do they want him as a tight end? So that's an intriguing recruitment. I think their priorities lie with, can you maintain a commitment, a relationship with Messiah Mickens? Because J1 Sider is going to continue to chip away with that. That's a top 10 running back conservatively in this class of 2026. And somebody that I think you need is an in-state Pennsylvania kid. So Penn State needs to make sure that Messiah Mickens is content and that you can keep him on board. See if you can get another wide receiver to replace Jerquaden Guilford. I imagine, because they've been actively recruited. They had 3 wide receivers committed this early in the class of 2026. So I found it kind of strange that Penn State was still, hey, an offer here went out, or, a visit was scheduled. And I know that you do that, right? You have to continue to maintain the relationships, as I mentioned. But I did find it interesting that, all right, you already have 3 wide receiver commits. Clearly something's up here, because you don't think that somebody's going to stay committed long term. And I think the writing was on the wall there with Guilford. Now, that's not the end all be all. He could recommit potentially, sure, even though I don't necessarily like their chances. But I am content with LeVar Keys and Jasir Rogers a lot. I think Rogers has the potential to be a superstar. So it's the fact that there are a lot of high potential players in this class of 2026. You definitely have to hit on your other primary targets, but that's easier said than done. But the players that they have currently in their class that have all the potential in the world, they're not just commitments to fill a scholarship number or anything like that. These guys can play ball, or else Penn State wouldn't be interested in them.
Yeah, I think they're in a better spot than people probably think. The one thing I've never worried about with Franklin and his staff is finding a plan to get really good players on campus. When we come back, I want to talk about some of their official visits, what more they can do. And it's honestly going to be part of it through spring ball, showing what they have still coming back. I mean, this is a team that was in the Final Four last year. They should have a lot of spring visitors, which will help them get OVs. So that is next here on the Portal Podcast. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. For me, I'm a really big fan of NCAA tournament, and I like following the underdogs in the Cinderella stories. I prefer to pick teams that shoot the ball from deep really well, especially in those big upset opportunities. But for you, it could be a halftime total. It could be one player on an over-under, whatever it may be. FanDuel is your place. So visit FanDuel.com and get into the college hoops action all NCAA tournament long. This is also brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? When dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building actual wealth. Here's a way to look at it. Instead of juggling all those different apps, use Monarch to check your finances, track your spending, and even plan your long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is even smoother than ever as well. You can track shared personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off of your first year. All right, Zach. They've got some pretty good visits lined up, and March is a big month for spring ball getting started and unofficial visits, which then leads, if all goes well, official visits. So I have a question for you. Let's start on the wide receiver topic. This year, do you think Penn State, I mean, they got a senior quarterback, a guy that's played since his freshman year. Do you think they will throw it around a little bit more? And B, do you think it'll start to show itself in spring? Like, receivers want to see it. That I know firsthand. They want to see it instead of you just telling them. What say you?
Well, it ultimately depends. So they don't have a Tyler Warren type of player in this offense. So the way that the offense is going to go, I think they're going to lean extensively on the run. You have Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen back. So to address what Penn State's plans are for the 2025 season, this is a team that is going to rely on Singleton, Allen, and probably a third running back. Whether that's Quentin Martin or Corey Smith. Wouldn't be surprised if we see some variation of the wishbone. With Andy Kotelnicki, it is not out of the question. And you might as well, because you have a strong stable of running backs where it is Singleton, Allen are two NFL caliber running backs right now, and they came back. Both of them came back. So it is also intriguing that Quentin Martin's not a player that should be riding the bench for very long. Maybe he enters the portal. I don't know. Same with Corey Smith. I think those guys are locked in. I'm not trying to stir anything here, but I'm saying is that those guys are so good that they're not just your everyday backup. So there might be a plan to get all of them on the football field in some capacity. Cam Wallace is going to come back from injury. So my point is that they're going to lean on the ground game, and they have potentially at a minimum top 5 offensive line in the country. So they're going to lean on ground and pound. As far as the passing game goes, look, Drew Aller's still a competent, capable quarterback. He has one bad game in the semifinal against the top 5 secondary. I get it. It's easy to draw your conclusions from there. But Drew Aller still took a major step in the right direction. He still has all the intangibles. He's your NFL quarterback prototype for the most part, and was in talks to be the number 1 overall pick. That doesn't happen by accident. So he's still a good player. Is he this elite 5-star that's lived up to those expectations? Not necessarily, but Drew has been so much better than people give him credit for. Now, the offense is going to look different in the passing game because they don't have a Tyler Warren type. So the ball's going to have to be distributed to whether that's Kyron Hudson, who I think can handle the number 1 wide receiver responsibilities, Devontae Ross, he's a speedster that transferred over from Troy. Put on good muscle, put on good weight since getting into Penn State's nutrition and training program. And so he can take a top off the defense. You have Kyron Hudson underneath. You have the 2 running backs. You have this offensive line. So they don't need a superstar necessarily in the passing game because all these complementary parts, the play action's going to open things up. Andy Kotelnicki as an offensive coordinator can scheme guys open. You just need guys to be able to catch. And run semi-decent routes. It's really not that complex here. As nice as it would be to have a Jeremiah Smith type of wide receiver, you just need somebody that is capable. I think Kyron Hudson, Devontae Ross, a healthy Caden Saunders give you that, at least for your first 3. But do they need more depth? Absolutely. So the offense isn't going to be too different from last season. You're going to get more ground and pound, but a little bit a thorough distribution of the football as opposed to it going to Tyler Warren 90% of the time.
Do you think that's going to help them this spring? Because I'm sure you've already seen lists for the unofficial visits, and they probably have a specific weekend, which usually the second spring scrimmage for every school. And then, of course, there's a spring game. Those two are the back-to-back weekends are usually the 2 weeks that everybody wants the kids to visit. Now, if a elite player like Iheanacho or somebody wanted to come on a Wednesday, they're not going to say no. Yeah. But the same point is still the same. Saturdays, it's easier for kids to get there. Are they lining up quite a few? And if they are, I expect it to go very well for Penn State this spring, personally. Because, again, you're coming off a Final Four appearance, senior quarterback. It shouldn't be that hard, especially with those 2 running backs coming back. That's as good a 1-2 punch as are in college football, in my opinion. And I think they're kind of lined up for a top 5 preseason ranking by most accounts.
They should. Some people had them number 1.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I don't think there's a pure number 1 next year. So anybody that's ranked in the top 5, I'm good with it. And I think Penn State is one of those 5. So here's my question then. will we see more commitments this spring, specifically based on what they see at practice and just the Penn State vibe? I've heard it's a great visit for a lot of kids. What's your prediction there?
I still think Penn State's going to play to its strengths. They're recruiting running back very well. Stan Drayton comes in. It's not like this is a significant drop off in terms.
Yeah,
now, is the recruiting aspect different? I think Sider's one of the best overall recruiters in the country. Absolutely. That is, we talk about not ideal. Losing Sider after 7 years is not ideal, but you recover that when you recover that and then some, when you get the caliber that Stan Drayton brings from being a head coach to working with Ezekiel Elliott once upon a time, Bijan Robinson. So they're going to continue to play to their strengths of, we dominate Pennsylvania recruiting. Penn State shifted its focus to New Jersey. So that's huge. That's where Jim Knowles comes into play. St. Joe's prep grad, right? So there's a lot of New Jersey connections, Philadelphia. So that's what Penn State's shifting. They're going to keep a stronghold on Pittsburgh, the western side of Pennsylvania, while trying to focus more efforts. Hey, we do okay in Philadelphia and New Jersey, but we can do better. Let's do better. And that's where Jim Knowles, Stan Drayton, and just Deion Barnes on defensive line. And that way you can just kind of focus. You just shift a little more attention there. So that's what Penn State's going to do. As far as, well, are they going to try to show off the wide receiver position? Not necessarily. Running back, tight end, defensive back, defensive line. That's been the strong suit. So at least in the next 1, 2, 3 year cycle, I think you're going to see a continuation of that. Drew Aller has the potential to kind of break the quarterback stereotype for them. So he's kind of the most important part of this, because the domino effect that he has, if he has a Heisman-like type of season, if he goes top 10 in the NFL draft, hey, and then Ethan Grunkemeyer takes over, or maybe Jackson Smolik, because he's in that quarterback room too. People forget about him. But if you continue this trend of, okay, it's more than just Trace McSorley going off to the NFL and Drew Aller, then Penn State becomes a place where quarterbacks really consider, not just LSU, not just following Lincoln Riley, right? That Penn State can be a legitimate destination to develop NFL quarterbacks, and then it's the domino effect. Wide receivers will want to go and play with a great signal caller. Tight ends, same thing. And then it's just by proxy, you're just going to want to be around elite level quarterbacks. So if Penn State and Drew Aller can reset the standard, then everything else takes care of itself.
Is there anybody in the recruiting class that you're most worried about picking another school that's currently pledged to the Nittany Lions?
Currently Messiah Mickens, to go back to him. I think that would be the only one. The guys that are on board all seem bought in. As far as I could have rattled off maybe a dozen or 2 dozen different prospects that are uncommitted that, maybe Penn State misses on that they really need. Joey O'Brien comes to mind, right? Those are just some of those players within Pennsylvania that you really need to get to stay at Penn State. Sure. Just continues that trend. I mean, this is your mantra. You don't just say these things and then don't back them up. So you got to be able to retain the in-state prospects. But as far, the only one that I have circled presently is Messiah Mickens. Guilford made sense. He is rising up recruiting boards as we speak. So, but everybody else seems locked in for the most part.
All right. Well, Zach, tell everybody where they can find your work, my friend.
I appreciate that, Brian. Appreciate you having me back on the show. Locked On Nittany Lions, kind of the same as you with the portal, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And we talk about Penn State sports daily. #1 daily Penn State sports podcast. It's more than just football. Talk football, wrestling postseason's here, so it's been the focal point there on the show. Basketball, recruiting, you name it. All your favorite Penn State sports teams.
Appreciate that, sir. For the portal, we are your daily recruiting, NIL, and transfer portal information. YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Odyssey, you name it, you can find us on the portal. Everybody have a good one. Take care.